blew my mind how here in Brazil you have a group of people who are interpreting our cultural heritage in the Mississippi Delta, and that they respect it, they celebrate it, they love it.
Olá pessoal, nós estamos aqui de volta com o UCS Podcast, o podcast com pessoas que entendem do assunto, e hoje nós temos mais um convidado especial, né? O Dr. Rolando Herts, que é da Universidade Delta State University, e ele vem falar aqui um pouquinho conosco sobre uma parceria que a UCS está fazendo com essa universidade e também um pouco sobre o que acontece na região dele. So welcome, thank you very much for being our program. So I think the better way for us to start this program is by saying who you are and maybe what you are doing here at our university. What is the partnership that is starting between UCS and Delta State University?
Yes, okay. Well, thank you again for having me here, having our whole team here. We're very, very honored to be here again. I'm Dr. Rolando Herts. I direct the Delta Center for Culture and Learning at Delta State University. I also serve as the executive director of the Mississippi Delta National Heritage Area, which is a cultural heritage development partnership with the National Park Service at the federal level in the United States.
Okay.
And so the Delta Center's mission is to promote greater understanding of Mississippi Delta culture and history and its significance to the world. We say we do that through education, partnerships, and community engagement. And our work with the National Heritage Area, where we are one of 55 congressionally designated national heritage areas across the United States that work with the National Park Service. And so national heritage areas are lived-in cultural landscapes, basically. People live there. They still are engaged in the practices and in the cultural, assets and all of that, that their parents and grandparents and all of that were involved in. And these cultural landscapes tell or play a part in telling the national story of the United States. So in our case, our cultural heritage themes in the Mississippi Delta include agriculture, the Mississippi River, in particular cotton agriculture, the blues, the civil rights movement, folk art, religion or religious expression, literature, immigrant groups that came to the Delta, like we have the Delta Chinese, the Delta Italians, we have the Jews, Irish heritage. We really are a microcosm of the history of the United States, and we're a living microcosm. So this is living cultural heritage. You find people who are still, again, listening to the blues. They're eating the foods like fried catfish and hot tamales. They are going to the river. There are still families that are that have land in their families for generations that still do cotton, farming and all of that. So this is also very much alive in the Mississippi Delta. And so how that connects to our partnership that we're developing with UCS. I presented at a conference in Rio for the National Association for Interpretation. It was an international conference that they did, and I presented on our work there.
Okay.
And at the same time that was happening, there was the Mississippi Delta Blues Festival in Rio happening, and there's a Mississippi Delta Blues bar in Rio that Toyo Bagoso, who started the festival, he's a part of all of that. I got a chance to meet Toyo. I went to the blues bar. I went to the festival, and it just blew my mind how here in Brazil you have a group of people who are interpreting our cultural heritage in the Mississippi Delta, and that they respect it, they celebrate it, they love it. And so then I learned about the Mississippi Delta Blues Festival here in Caxias.
Yes.
So when I was in Rio, that was the first year they did the festival there, but who knew that it was at that time, I think, going on for maybe 12 years. So when I went back to Delta State and spoke with colleagues there, we decided that we wanted to bring a group here to experience the Blues Festival here in Caxias. And so that's what we did. So we brought in our partner, Bubba O'Keefe from Visit Clarksdale. We have the B.B. King Museum that is represented also on our board for the Heritage area. They sent a representative, Keith Johnson, the great-nephew of Muddy Waters, who's also an alum of Delta State University. And so a group of us came down and experienced the festival, and we learned about the University of Caxias do Sul and that Toyo was an alum of UCS. And that there are departments within the university that also connect to this festival, connect to cultural heritage. And so in 2019, when we came, we developed this official partnership between Delta State and UCS that could lead to educational and cultural exchange opportunities. Of course, that was November 2019, and we all know what happened in about March 2020, right, with COVID.
The world went upside down.
Yeah, absolutely. And so at that point, everything stopped,
Yes.
And so we are now back here, reestablishing, reigniting those relationships. Fabi Santori, who is our main contact here, really coordinated bringing faculty and staff together. We met the vice president, who's very supportive of international engagement. His edict was get together and let's talk about what we can make happen, not just have conversation, let's move. And so I really appreciated that. So we had a really good, I think, visioning session and action plan development session about what next steps we can take Delta State and UCS together to start really doing this exchange. We've been here for less than 24 hours and we already have a plan in the works. So it's very exciting.
And could you share some of the ideas that you guys had?
Sure. Well, from our end at Delta State, one of the things we wanted to do this year, and I think we were being pretty ambitious to do this, was to bring at least a couple of students with us, as well as a faculty member. It didn't work out logistically, but still just the thought of doing that and trying to put the mechanisms in place for that to happen got our minds, clicking about, okay, how do we strategically engage departments within the university that connect to UCS and connect to the Mississippi Delta Blues Festival Brazil? So we have the Delta Music Institute at Delta State University, which has been rated as one of the top music recording education programs in the country by Rolling Stone magazine in the U.S. That just recently happened. So there's the Delta Music Institute. We have the Department of History and Social Sciences, which includes history, includes geography, includes tourism. We have a business school there at Delta State. We have a digital media arts division there that deals with digital storytelling, so how to use videography, photography to tell cultural heritage stories. So we have these departments there that truly can connect, and students could really learn from coming here and seeing the Mississippi Delta cultural heritage being interpreted by people here in Brazil. And what does that look like? And how might that inspire us in terms of what we do with our festivals there? How might students be inspired to start their own festival or a business that's related to a festival that exists there in the Delta? We have, in our office, we have a grants program for the heritage area that has supported youth education programs around music and oral history, storytelling. So how might people in those organizations also come with us and see how Mississippi Delta culture and history is being interpreted and how that connects back to the work that they're doing? That the Mississippi Delta is recognized as a global brand, and that is valued by so many people internationally. What does that do to the self-esteem? How does that change people's thoughts there in the Delta about the value of their own cultural heritage? So there's so many different layers to this. And so our thinking is that not only would we have students and faculty from Delta State, but students and faculty from other universities there in the region, in the Mississippi Delta region, as well as community members and community stakeholders who would join us on what we call a Delta delegation to Brazil on an annual basis. And throughout the year, building people up to this pivotal moment when they would come to Caxias and experience this, and then what do they take back and share with other community members, and just make it a feedback loop. So from our end, that's what we're thinking about. The conversation was about UCS and how they might start an exchange then back to our region. So you all have the Mississippi Delta Blues Festival in November here in Caxias. We have the Juke Joint Festival in Clarksdale being the blues tourism capital of the world, we say there in the Delta. And that happens on an annual basis in April. And so once they learned about that, they started thinking, okay, how can they get UCS students, prepared to go there and experience
in April,
it.
and you guys come here in
Yes,
November.
in November. So that's the start of some kind of structured exchange and partnership and what can happen throughout the course of the year, again, to prepare UCS students, Delta State students, or students from other universities there in the Mississippi Delta to experience things here in Caxias. So I think that's kind of where we are at this point. It's a great place to start.
Yeah, it's very interesting that starts with you guys going to Rio de Janeiro, which everybody, when think about Brazil, go to Rio de Janeiro.
Absolutely.
You end up here in the south of Brazil. Probably it's a different Brazil that you guys have an image out there, right?
Absolutely, I would say so. And see, even before I attended the conference and presented at the conference in Rio, I had been to Salvador da Bahia.
Okay.
And that's another Brazil,
another
right?
Brazil,
That's another form of Brazil. The black state of Brazil, if you will. And I met a gentleman there. They call him Sparrow. He owns a record shop in the Pelourinho district there in Salvador. And his thing was, we are, meaning they're in that area, the Recôncavo region, where they brought slaves in to work the land, where samba music was born.
Yes.
He claims that is the Mississippi Delta of Brazil, because samba is the root music of Brazilian music, right? And blues is the root music of American music. So he likened it to that, and I said, that is really fascinating that he thought of it that way. But there are apparently others, scholars, musicologists and such, who would argue that is the case as well. So there's much more to be explored there. I just learned recently that just south here, Porto Alegre had one of the largest slave trading, I think, markets in Brazil. Is that right?
Yeah, not that much, because here in the south of Brazil was the last place that was colonized. Okay. And when they get here, Portuguese didn't have enough people to colonize after Brazil. And I guess you could say that one of the good things that the Portuguese were, they kept the frontiers. That's why the whole Brazil is a country, and the Spanish part, you have different countries. So Portuguese, they were very good in killing any revolution that we have. We were actually a country for 10 years, and we still celebrate that war that we lost. But Rio Grande do Sul was a state for a country for 10 years during this revolution. And because it was the last place that we stayed, there was, during that time, Brazil already have, I think, 300 years. That's history lessons when I was elementary student in the elementary school. So something a little foggy. History is not my field. But anyway, when they start to colonize here, there was, I think Brazil was already a country, was already independent from Portugal. And the elites, they thought that they had, because of all the 300 years, maybe almost 400 years of slavery, and especially in that part of Brazil, Bahia, the northeast, I agree, it's a whole different Brazil. There was this feeling of the elites to, I don't know if that's the right term, wash Brazil, something like that. They want more white people here. So that's why in the south of Brazil you have more white people than black people. But there was a whole different type of colonization. They start to bring people from, in this region, Italy, and the cities around here, Germany. The first ones that came was Germans. And they came with the promise to get land. And they got land, they got the whole structure. All the things were already in place for them to arrive, to settle, to establish a city, things like that. And they got a huge amount of land, huge amount. I mean, you can put a lot of different countries inside of Brazil. Rio Grande do Sul is the same size of Ecuador, for example. Wow. And so to this day, a lot of people still have land from that area. Wow. So it was a whole different type of colonization. A lot of cities around here, they still speak or German or Italian. And was like 150, 180 years ago that the first immigrants came. And there's the city where I live, people speak German with each other on stores, in the street, a lot of signs in German. That's not what happened with black people when they arrive here. They were put a lot of different from a lot of different tribes together, especially for they could not communicate with each other, so they didn't speak the same language, and with that they could not revolt. And when that happened here in the south of Brazil, there was already in the end of the slavery. So I don't think I heard about that in Porto Alegre because it was the first settlement of Portuguese here, but that Brazil was already in the course to be a country, and it was not the same thing. So that's why we have a very rich culture here, but it's different from what probably you found in Bahia and what I agree is similar to Mississippi, and we still keep some traditional from different regions of Europe. And it's interesting because what people think what Europe is from here, it's Europe from 100 years ago. You know, if they go there, they're going to be disappointed with the state of mind of people there. But yeah, in terms of how it was colonized, it was very different. So that's why you have maybe three or four types of Brazil. And the music, what we call Brazilian popular music, MPB in Portuguese, they started, and I think it's very similar to what happened in that region of the United States. It started with people from Bahia, people from the Northwest, and people in Rio de Janeiro. So we have bossa nova, and we have,
which I love.
I think it's the most known type of music in Brazil. That and samba. And all start there. So I think this type of colonization with this mix, we have a lot of people from different countries here, but the colonization was different. It was way different. So it's not the same thing, and all this very famous type of music that are known in the rest of Brazil, they happen there.
So then that's what's so fascinating. Thank you for that historical context, because again, I just know what I was told about that, but this gives more nuance. What's still fascinating, though, is that you have Brazilians, particularly in this part of Brazil, who have this fascination with the blues. Then, right? And again, just based on kind of anecdotal, conversations, if you will, that samba music, by and large, is considered here to be poor people's music or poor black people's music, and there's not a lot of respect or reverence for it. But
you could say that.
Yeah, maybe amongst some groups of folks. But then, ironically, they have this love for the blues, which came from poor black people in the United States.
I don't think they know that.
Right? I mean, so there's an educational gap there, if you will. And so, from our perspective, coming from the United States, where there are people who do not have, black and white, and other who do not have respect for the blues for various reasons, then you come here and there is this great regard for it. I mean, it just makes for an interesting conversation, I think.
Yes.
It provides an opportunity for people to see the music and the culture in a different way. And so that's what I also think is a great opportunity, at least for people from the Mississippi Delta, to see that, okay, while in your own country people may not respect it, there are people all over the world who do. And why is that? And how can you then create opportunity for yourself based on that?
Yeah, but there is a lot of resistance from any type of music that come from the north of Brazil. I mean, in general, what people really like to listen is not like that. There's something that is said, there's something that is actually happened. So I would say that the general population, they like popular music, like everybody, like anywhere in the world. But yeah, there is some prejudices about that, especially with music that comes from the north. And there's the whole. Right now we have this we just have elections, and we are very divided on that.
Yes.
And if you look at the map, the South voted very different from the North. So there is this division that there's some history there. And
Sure.
again, we start with colonization, the way that was colonized. And I would say that maybe, then that's just myself speculating on this subject. I don't know that much to say that, to infer. But I would say that because of this resistance that we have, that usually we have here from anything that comes from the north, we try to appreciate things that are outside of, or from here or outside of Brazil. So, yeah, this is the place where, and we're very similar here, especially in this state with Argentina and Uruguay. I would say that we have more in common with them, except the language, than we have with the rest of Brazil. Climate, the place, it's close, the type of colonization was similar. We drink the same kind of tea that we have. We are called Gaúchos. That I know that people in the United States think Gaúcho are from Argentina, and that's actually true. But here we are the Gaúchos of Brazil, and people who are born here are called Gaúchos. So which will be the same type of cowboy in the United States. I think that because of that, we like to see ourselves. I'm not saying that's true, but we like to see ourselves as a different type of Brazilians. And we kind of, that's one of the reasons why we were a country for 10 years. We like to do things that are in the opposite of what the rest of Brazil is doing. So maybe there's some truth that we like rock and roll a lot. Just like Argentina, our fans of football, they are similar what Argentina does than the rest of Brazil. And we got a lot of heat from that because the rest of Brazil, they have the same type of look of us. Like, you guys think you are Argentinians, and Argentina and Brazil have a real rivalry in football because of that. So maybe that's one of the reasons. But my father is not from here. That's why I have a different perspective. My father is from São Paulo, and my mother is from here.
Okay.
Yeah. So what I can see is that the different perspective is that I remember when I was a kid, and we have this whole culture, what is to be from here. And I went there, and I asked to my cousins, what is the things that you have there from here? And they could not say because, but we do what Brazilians do. And now we know things that Gaúchos do, and there is the rest of Brazil. I know that in Civil War in the United States, you guys were almost split in two countries. And probably there's some kind of the same feelings there. I mean, different ways, but...
I guess you could say that there's some of that attitude preserved. I know when I moved to the Mississippi Delta, that was the first time that I actually heard people refer to people from the North as Yankees and being serious about it, right? Like there's still that prevailing mindset of the lost cause from the Civil War. And so there is a kind of insularity, if you will, that I think you're describing here, that we're not like the rest of the United States, not even like the rest of the South. There's some differences, not even like the rest of the people in Mississippi. Like we're a very distinctive culture there in the Mississippi Delta. What I'm curious about is that in the case of what you're talking about here in southeastern Brazil with the Gaúchos, this fascination, you said with rock and roll, but then blues, which rock and roll came from the blues, right? And maybe not as aware that all of that comes from black culture. And so I'm gleaning from what you're saying that this rejection of things from northern Brazil likely falls along racial and class lines. Is that correct? And so, again, that's what's so fascinating to me and curious to me, that they have a fascination, that the Gaucho culture would have a fascination with rock and roll and blues when that comes from black culture. But you're rejecting black culture within the country that you're in. So
it doesn't make sense. I know.
It doesn't. And is it really because that they're not acknowledging or don't know where blues and rock and roll really comes from?
I'd say they don't know.
That's fascinating.
Maybe people who are really into, yes, they do know. But in general, we like a lot of sound, the rock that comes from United Kingdom. And the first, I remember my parents, the first icon of rock and roll that they know it's Elvis, so a white guy. So I don't think that they know that what comes before that, you know.
Right.
And maybe that, but again, I'm just speculating here. Maybe there's something with that, but definitely they don't make the connection that blues come from black, poor people who are, you know, who came from a community that was on the margin of society.
Yes, yeah.
As same of samba and bossa nova.
Absolutely.
Here.
It came out of the same spirit of that. And what I will say, though, in speaking with Toyo, when I met him in Rio, and that blues bar apparently is located close to where there was a slave market there in Rio. It's not far from there. He acknowledges the roots of the blues. And I think those who work with and around him acknowledge those roots. And they, I think, do a very intentional job of bringing black blues artists, particularly from the United States, to participate in the festival, which I think is so very important and vital. And that's another role I think that we have played in our office, working with Visit Clarksville, working with the B.B. King Museum to bring, like I mentioned, Keith Johnson, who's the great nephew of Muddy Waters and was a student of mine and worked in our office as an alumnus of Delta State University. You know, he came in 2019 and just blew everyone out the water. He's a wonderful blues artist, but it's that authenticity piece because he comes from the community that created that culture. And there were any number of other artists who were there as well. And we are very appreciative of the opportunity to bring those voices into this, you know, space, to bring that message, to bring authenticity to this space. That's another role that I think we're playing with this exchange, and that's so very vital.
Yes, and can show people what the roots of all this movement that people like, but maybe they are not doing the connection. What is interesting about that is that for my final paper when I was graduating, and also when I did my master's degree, I studied black culture here, especially in this region, not in Caxias, I'm not from here, but in Porto Alegre.
Yes.
And this black market that you said was in a region called... I'm going to try to do a translation here. I think the best translation would be the Black Hill, something like that.
Okay.
And there's a university there now. It's one of the most expensive places in Porto Alegre now.
Wow.
Because Porto Alegre means...
Happy port?
Yeah, happy or gay or gay port or gay harbor, something like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, happy harbor, if you will.
Happy harbor. Okay.
So there's... before, in the start, the elite region was across the river. And that's why the black people live in the hills, because it was far away. So we have something, I don't know if it's going to make a good translation, but we have something called quilombos, which is black communities.
Okay. Is it like favelas?
No. It's
like
something
favelas.
before that.
Okay, before favelas.
Yeah, it's a place where... especially the slaves that were free or they got free, they found these communities.
Okay, so we call those maroon communities, I think. That's,
Yeah, here was quilombos.
Okay.
So there was a quilombo in this hill. That's why they call it the Black Hill. And now it's a university. And what happened, I think that, so you can understand this whitewashing, I don't know if that's a good
no, that's an apt term.
Yeah. Right now, this region is called White River. There's no river, and especially not white. But, you know, this effort to eliminate the black history from this region, it's very vivid, it's very true. This university there, they have a garden because they acknowledge this history. And in this garden have a special flower called camellias. I don't know the translation in English. But this camellias very, very important symbolism. Because when we were trying to end slavery in Brazil was one of the last countries who ended slavery. There was this princess here in Brazil that she was leading the movement. I don't know if that's how much of true is that, but that's what they teach us in history classes. And the way that she's signed to people who wants to get free, it was by wearing this flower, and the person who was wearing this flower, this camellia, they knew, okay, he wants or she wants to be free, so they help to get them away from, the slavery. There's this whole thing that will happen at the time. It was right before they ended the slavery. So camellia is a very strong symbolism with the freedom of the black people from slavery. So they have this garden there, and that's the only reference that I found there were black people living there.
So the intentional erasure of black history, black culture, black people, and there are analogs of that in the United States. So here's yet another opportunity for people to look into that and why that happened. What's the history behind that, and then reflect on that in terms of how that has happened in the United States as well. I think that there's just a great educational opportunity through those lenses to look at how these regions, these places have developed around these kinds of attitudes, and what kinds of decisions were made regarding how the land would be developed, how spaces would be created or dismantled, renamed, as you're talking about, as you're suggesting, in order to achieve the ends of one group dominating another, one group erasing another. So those are all of the things that, honestly, I think we want to open the door to people thinking about. And how do we proceed? If we're aware of these things, if we believe in the old adage that if you don't know your history, you're doomed to repeat it.
Yes.
If you understand this and that is what has happened, how do we now move forward? If we're in a place now where we want to make amends, where we want to see people truly come together, where we want to see diversity, equity, and inclusion, not just in terms of the cosmetics, if you will, or the image or whatever, but truly, what does economic inclusion look like? What does social inclusion look like? What does it look like to create a space where people can share their stories authentically, with a full-throatedness, fully empowered, fully actualized? And that honestly makes for better tourism. If you're talking about cultural heritage tourism, having source communities involved in the process of planning what that looks like and what their level of participation looks like, and then how their communities are also going to benefit economically and socially from the process. But I think we have to look back, as you're saying, at what has actually happened before, and how do we avoid that from happening. We have to study that and understand that it actually did happen, and that it could happen again if we're not aware.
Yes.
Yeah. So I think that there are all of those kinds of opportunities through these kinds of exchanges. Sometimes it's difficult for us to see what is happening in our own backyard, right? You know?
Sure, yeah.
But if we go someplace else and see it and say, okay, this happened here, how does that reflect what's happened back at home?
Yeah.
It can open people's eyes.
And I think that's very needed, especially here in Brazil, because I don't know if the rest of the world has this knowledge or are aware of how things are here in Brazil, but we are kind of isolated here. Because if you think about most of population lives close to the coast, and the rest of the South America, they live in the other side of the continent, and they speak Spanish. They don't speak Portuguese. And the rest of the world are either is on other side of the ocean on the other hemisphere. So with that, we don't have that much contact with people from different countries or different cultures. Although Brazil, you could say, and that's a dichotomy in each way, because Brazil is the place where all the cultures come together. It probably is just Brazil and United States have all these different types of people living together. We have the largest Japanese population outside Japan, and we have all this thing happen. But once those people got here, And because the immigration happened so long ago, they are isolated. So we lose connection with the history, especially with the history of the world. And that's those type of things, or those type of partnerships are very important, especially from a region that is so isolated like here. Because we're not only in Brazil, which by itself is kind of isolated, but in the south of Brazil,
right.
which is isolated by itself. So that's very interesting. Another thing that I'm curious to know, it's a lot of different things happen in Mississippi. You have blues, you have wonderful, what's the word for that? It slipped my mind.
Food?
Food, yeah. No, I was trying to
culinary arts, food
culinary,
ways.
Culinary,
yes.
That's the word I was looking for.
Gastronomy, as some people say.
And what do you think what happened in that place that generates so much good?
Yeah, I mean, Black culture, Black people. There have been documentaries done in recent years about, how not only blues music was the root of all American music, but, enslaved Africans coming here with their culinary know-how and just resourcefulness, making a way out of no way, taking parts of the pig that, and taking herbs and stuff from the garden, and creating these culinary delights. And how that was infused into just the overall American, culture and of food, masters of cooking. And that is that's a story that also is often not been told, at least not on a national scale. I think that we're, realizing that more and more. But the Mississippi Delta, is a predominantly Black region because of the movement of enslaved Africans from, New Orleans on up the river into Greenville. And, the Delta was actually settled mainly after the Civil War. There are a few Delta towns like Clarksdale that are considered to be antebellum. They were established before the Civil War and the only reason that's the case is because they were on rivers, those towns. Greenville, Clarksdale, Friars Point, Greenwood, they were able to establish them because they could get in there by the rivers. It was a wilderness there. It was an old ancient swamp with large trees that had to be cleared, and it was slave labor that cleared that land and made way for cotton production. And because the soil there was so rich and there was such an international demand for cotton, that became a hotbed of cotton production, and cotton was king at that time going into, the latter part of the 19th century. That all was really happening there. And so the culture of the people, that was a hotbed for the culture, the food, the music, and all of that. So, there's so much of the American story, American culture that comes from the Mississippi Delta. And it struck me when you talked about isolation and people feeling that they now want to get out. And that's been happening over decades. Black folks trying to get out from under the oppression because there were times at which, because it was free labor, Black people were used for free labor or cheap labor, were not allowed to leave. Not until agriculture was mechanized was it okay, we're done with you, you can leave. But I think the spirit of isolation that was there is still there. And I think with the work that we're doing, we are trying to say to people, okay, you can get out and come back. You're encouraged to get out and work and explore and interact with different people. And again, do it with pride in your own cultural heritage. You have something to contribute.
Yes.
You've been told that you're not worth anything because you're from the Mississippi Delta. And that's the poor blues, and it's the poorest region, the poorest state in the United States. And there are all these horrible things that happen there, lynchings and all of that. But now people want to learn about all of that in order to move into a brighter future. And so those who are, again, from those source communities, those whose parents and grandparents and great-grandparents experienced that, and it's encoded in them, it is time for them to be at the table telling the stories. And so how do we create opportunities for that? that is what I see here in terms of coming here and shedding light on the fact that, yes, if you didn't know, now you know, blues comes from Black culture. It comes from Black oppression. It comes, and these are the stories that blues tells. And this is why it should be celebrated and understood. It's not just a money-making scheme. It's an educational tool. It is a tool for upliftment. It's a tool for creating community. And that community is not just within the bounds of the Mississippi Delta or the Mississippi or the American South. It's global, and it truly is. And we're seeing that when we have blues tourism, people coming to the Delta from all over the world to experience it. So there's such a great opportunity, I think, for people to be uplifted and to realize the value of their cultural heritage and really stave off that whole idea of isolation. I'm alone in this, and I have nowhere to go. I have nowhere to be. The sense of not feeling a sense of belonging. I think that hangs in the air, honestly, in the Mississippi Delta. And the reason I know that is because growing up in that area as a child, I'm a product of the Great Migration. My parents moved to the Chicagoland area in the late 1960s, and I was born up there, and then we moved back south. And when we moved to the Arkansas Delta right across the bridge from Greenville, Mississippi, I was so sad. And I didn't know where that sadness came from. I was probably like 10 years old. It was something in the air. And I just knew it. I lived in a town called Eudora, Arkansas. My father was the first Black superintendent of schools there in the 1980s. But the town was still divided Black and white by Main Street. And the Black side of town had gravel roads. And the white side of town had paved streets. And whenever it flooded, the Black side of town got the worst of it. So I remember waking up one morning and my father was getting us out of the house because the water, it flooded. The water had come in, and it was nearly to the top of my mattress. My father's office was with the school district across Main Street on the white side of town. He was able to rescue us and take us over there. And we stayed there for a few days because they had a kitchen and everything like that, so we were safe and dry. But everybody else in the Black community had to deal with it. But the white side of town was on higher ground, and it was designed that way. And that was a critical moment for me in terms of understanding the value of education, understanding the value of being exposed and being out and meeting other people and interacting with other cultures and all that, that would put me in the position to live a better life, right? And so, but that isolation I talk about, it's in the air, it's still there, and I think it comes from the spirits before. And so again, how do we use that as a touchstone to say, okay, we can learn from this and move forward and make quality of life better for everyone? It doesn't have to remain this way. But I think there's a mindset, though, that says if we change something, somebody's going to lose something. It's a zero-sum game type of mindset, right? That's what we have to change. I think that's what we have the opportunity to change with these kinds of partnerships.
It's very interesting because if you change the word cotton for sugar, it's basically exactly what happened in the northeast of Brazil here, the whole history and how Black people were very cast outside of society and they didn't have any opportunity to, get integrated. And it's not like when the slavery ended, they said, okay, now it's just fine, just everybody's the same. No, they still, and was in some ways actually worse because now they don't have any place to stay and they have to find a way to live in a society that just like yesterday was living with slaves. So they are not slaves, but they didn't have anything. They didn't have land. They didn't have any way to support themselves. And that's, we still live the result of that to this day. And I was mentioned before about my the thesis that I did for my master's degree. And I went to this university especially because of that, because they acknowledged the history of that place. They were one of the first universities in Brazil that was trying to do the quotas. And so I went there to study how that was going. There was a lot of resistance from the community, from the students, from the professors. Like you said, they thought that they were losing something. They thought that they bring out this whole meritocracy, something like that.
Meritocracy. Yeah.
So I interview all the students that were in this program, and the struggle that they have. Before anything, they had better grades of the average of the university. But the struggle that they have to simply get to university, because as the city was growing, the black people were pushed away from, and they are living every time more farther than they were before, or in the regions that were really hard to get, especially with roads that were, very a road with it's just ground with not pavement. And when they got some days of rain, cars could not get there. And they have to overcome all of that, to be able to go to the university. And nobody knew about that. Nobody cared. The people who were saying that, I'm against these quotas, they didn't know this reality. And we are trying to show them how. And first of all, they got, it's not a quota that, because this was a private university, it's not a quota to get to not going through the process. They just didn't have to pay for the university. So they still have to go to the selection program. And they come from public schools. They're, not well funded.
Yes.
But they some of them overcome.
Yes.
I just imagine how much was left behind. And that's one university and one example. So I remember when I published my paper about this whole situation, and a lot of people came to me and they didn't realize, and that's the power of information, and that's the power of collaboration.
Yes.
When you show people the other side, what's happening the other side, and that's very interesting.
So everything you just talked about is what we're struggling against in the United States as well. And so how do we open the floor up to conversation for people to see what each other's going through, and how some of these things are about our shared humanity, right? How might we be able to change people's mindset just by shedding light on what you're talking about? How do we stave off that isolation and get people to talk across these lines and understand each other?
I don't know. I know that in the United States, racism, and especially this, it was more open, I would say, because in recent history, you guys had things like people could not drink from the same fountain, you cannot sit in the front of the bus. That didn't happen in Brazil, but in a way it's harder to combat racism here because of that, because it's a veiled, I don't know if that's right.
It's covert.
Racism.
Yeah.
It's racism that you cannot point at. You cannot say, okay, it's happening this and this is more, on the cover. For example, to this day, here at our university, we have on our classroom maybe one or two people who are black. And to understand why that happened, we have to understand that, Brazil, south of Brazil, there's a lot of white people. That's not one of the reasons. If you go to the poor part of Caxias, you're going to see a lot of black people. And what happened to prevent them to get to the university? So by actually studying that, by actually trying to understand the reasons, is the way for us to try to make better,
Yes. Absolutely. That's the only way that we can. By really looking at the situation. And so again, I'm glad to hear that these conversations are happening here. I mean, I'm just speaking with colleagues today here at UCS. I think there is some interest in looking at the system and how it creates those kinds of structural inequalities that you see, that on its face you could easily say, well, it's because they're lazy, or it's because they didn't get good grades, or that kind of thing. But if you peel back the layers, there's some things, some real roadblocks and obstacles that are in place there. How do we address that? And those are the same issues that we're having in the United States as well. So to hear that, if we bring people here to have the conversations here, then it's like, okay, maybe some light bulbs will come on.
Yes.
And some conversations can happen about how that can actually be addressed, and addressed through cultural heritage development. Because a lot of this is steeped in our cultural heritage.
Yeah. You have to look back, like you said, to not make the same mistakes in the going forward, right?
Absolutely.
So the conversation is very good.
Yes.
And this type of conversation actually can go, for me at least more 1 hour, 2 hours. But yeah, our program is getting to the end. So I just would like to thank you for coming, and thank you for giving the time to talking. Yes. And also to invite you for the next time to come back here, and maybe we can discuss how this partnership went further and talk more about history and what we have in common and different from what you guys have there.
Absolutely. We'd love to do that. And again, thank you for having me and our team here at UCS.
Ok. Pessoal, então por hoje é isso aí. Aguardo vocês no próximo episódio do UCS Play Podcast. Não esqueçam de se inscrever no nosso canal, de dar a curtida e lembrando que nós temos a versão em áudio também no Spotify. Até mais.